Your hand will hold me still, even when my world is shaking. Your hand will hold me still. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made.
Good evening and welcome to Theology Chat with Chumpy. It is Tuesday night, and so that's what we do. What is Theology Chat with Chumpy? If you haven't seen this before, what we do is we try and take the Sunday sermon and we kind of pull out the theological concepts behind what Pastor Melissa is talking about on Sunday morning, answer some questions, define some terms, kind of break down as much as we can the theological ideas. We're doing a little bit differently this series that we're in the middle of, though, with the Moses series that we're in. Because we're kind of going through the story and you only have so much time on a Sunday morning, there's a lot of stuff that gets left out because we're covering a wide range of, not range, a wide arc, a wide story arc. That's the word I'm looking for. And so naturally there's going to be some stuff that we can't get fit in there. So what I'm trying to do on Tuesday nights is kind of fill in the blanks that get left out on Sunday mornings. So with that, I'll jump in, and Pastor Melissa on Sunday was talking about the part, just to recap, first of all, we talked about first the Moses being born into the situation where Israelite babies were being killed, kills an Egyptian, flees Egypt, gets called by God to go back and set the Israelites free. God sends all these plagues on Egypt. Egypt eventually lets them go, but then chases after them. God lets the Israelites through the Red Sea and then brings it back down on the Egyptians. The Israelites go to Mount Sinai, where they get the Ten Commandments from God, and then as they're getting the Ten Commandments from God, break one of them by making a calf to worship. And then after that, they move on from there, and they're heading up towards the Promised Land. And so that's kind of where we find them now, as they're kind of on the edge of the Promised Land. They're almost there. And so before they go rushing into the Promised Land, Moses sends in representatives from the tribes of Israel, and he sends them in to kind of go out and spy out the land, get the lay of the land, figure out what's going on there, who's living there, what's going on. And so he sends out these people, and they go through the land, and they come back and they give their report. So Pastor Melissa talked about that on Sunday morning, and I just wanted to kind of bring up a little bit of, there we go. So this is the land of Israel, okay? And so they're basically starting out down at the very bottom there. That's where they're at when this happens. And they send the 12 spies out, and they go north, all right? And so if you read the story there in the Bible, it talks about them. They go through and they run into these different peoples. And so it shows you there on the map kind of who's living in what area. And I bring this up because I want us to know and just kind of understand that they're not just walking out into unpopulated land. Like, this is already, people already live here. There's already these people groups that are established there. There's cities, there's towns. Like these people already lived there. And so they started down in the south there, and it says they go north into the Negev, where it says the Amalekites, which actually that's the section, just they're not labeled on there, but the section west of where it says Edomites, that's Amalekites. And so then they go north into the hill country, and then they run into Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites. That's that section. If you go straight up the middle there, that's those folks. The Hivites don't get mentioned in the Bible in this passage specifically. So they go clean up to that northern section there where it says Hittites, scouting out this land. And then as they're coming back, or on the way, actually I'm not sure, it doesn't say, they say there's Canaanites that live along the sea and along the Jordan. And so that's where you see them there on the map there. They're kind of split up. And then they don't even get mentioned in this passage that we see in chapter. Ooh, I should have wrote that one down. They don't get mentioned in that passage, but there's these other groups in there too. The Philistines don't get mentioned in that passage, but the Philistines definitely become an issue later on. The Perizzites become an issue later on. The Moabites become an issue later on. The Amorites. And so all these people, like, these are the people that Israel is going to be running into and having a problem with for most of the rest of the Old Testament. So they're going in and scouting out this land. And so I just bring that up to point out, like, these are already established places and established people. They've got infrastructure. They've got fields there. And you think about this, like, these people have been living there and thriving for who knows how long. And these Israelites are coming out of Egypt who were slaves and have been living on manna. And so I don't think it's much of a stretch for them to come back and say, you know, these people were like giants compared to us. Because these Egyptians, I don't know why these Israelites have been kind of eking out a living in the wilderness. And they come into these lands where it's flowing with milk and honey. There's so much resources, and so the people they're eating better. They're probably built. When we were in high school, I remember there was this football team that we hated playing. It was Fort Hill football team, and we always made these comments that, like, these Fort Hill, I don't know what they feed these people up there, because they're all jacked. But it was kind of that idea, like, these people were going in where this was a place where the people were formidable. And so that's why they came back, a lot of them, and said, you know, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to happen. These people they're like giants compared to us. And then Caleb was the one that said, no. Look at all this stuff. God wants to give this to us. And he said that he's going to do this for us. And so he was the one that was saying, no, we need to do this. But the rest of them did not. And so because they decided not to, God said, okay, you're not going to go in. I'm going to let this generation die off, and then we'll start fresh with the next generation. So then they go back south, wandering some more through the wilderness. And as they're doing that, there's several stories that I'm going to hit on that between now and what we're talking about next week. The first of them is there's several rebellions that happen among the Israelite people against Moses, against Aaron, against Moses and Aaron, and really against God, because Moses and Aaron are like the representatives of God to the Israelite people. And so there's several rebellions that happen, and one of them is by these people named Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, and they're kind of leaders within the Israelite people. They gather this group of influential community leaders, and they kind of come up and they say, look, we don't get why you think you're over all of us, Moses. And they basically say, we're going to rule ourselves. We don't need you. And so take a hike. So Moses is like, once again, he's going to God and saying, what do we do about these people? And God says, look, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. And so God is ready to wipe them out. And Moses kind of steps in and says, wait. And once again, reminds God of his faithfulness. And so God says, okay, what I need you to do is I want you to pull back from these people. Don't have anything to do with them. And tell the people. Actually, he says, this is from chapter 16. He says, then the Lord said to Moses, I think I have this one here. Nope, I don't. It says, so then the Lord said to Moses, say to the assembly, move away from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Moses got up and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. He warned the assembly, move back from the tents of these wicked men. Do not touch anything belonging to them, or you will be swept away because of their sins. So they moved away from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Dathan and Abiram had come out and were standing there with their wives, children, and little ones at the entrances to the tents. And so all these Israelites that were like camped around there, I guess, pulled up their tents and moved back. Talk about social distancing. They moved their tents back because God told Moses to tell them, like, don't have anything, like, you want to get away from these guys. And the reason why is because then God brought his judgment on those people. The land kind of split and swallowed them into it. And so God had his judgment on them. Now, what we can take away from that is sometimes God tells us there's things and people we need to stay away from. And people gets a little tricky because, I mean, like Jesus, obviously he went and ate with sinners and he was in with them. However, there are times that God tells us for our benefit, we need to stay away from something or someone. We aren't Jesus. And sometimes there's things that we can't handle and God knows that. And so, for example, if somebody is in addiction recovery, there's people, places, and things that they should not be going to because it's not good for them. This is a case where God didn't want the people that were innocent to be caught up in the sins of the people that were guilty. And so this is a case where God says, you need to back away from this. And so sometimes we need to listen when God says, back up. So that's one story of one of the rebellions against Moses in this section of the Exodus. Another, like I said, they're wandering through the wilderness. They don't have fields and farms that they can harvest for food, and they don't have wells dug because they're wandering around. So water and food are kind of scarce. And so once again, we saw it earlier in the story, once again they ran out of water. And so the people start grumbling and saying, oh, what'd you bring us out here to die or whatever. Seriously, it's a theme over this whole Exodus. It's like something happens and they keep saying, oh, what'd you bring us out here to die, blah blah blah. You would think they would come up with some new complaints, but so they run out of water, and Moses goes to God and says, hey, we're out of water, you fixed this last time, what do we do? So Moses goes to God, and God tells him to take the staff that you and your brother Aaron, take the staff and you and your brother, I can't talk tonight. Take the staff and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. You will bring water out of the rock for the community, so they and their livestock can drink. So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence, just as he commanded him. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock? Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me enough to honor me as holy in sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land that I give them. Now, what's going on here? God tells Moses, speak to the rock, tell it to pour water or whatever. And then Moses, he makes it happen. The problem is, I mean, at first glance, you look at this and you're thinking, this seems really harsh. Moses basically did what God told him to do, gave the people water, and what's God upset about here? Well, I don't know exactly what the reasoning is here, but here's what my thought is on it. God told Moses. Now remember, throughout this whole story, going back to Egypt and everything, God has given the Israelites very specific instructions on pretty much everything. So many instructions. So many so that, like, we're in the book of Numbers now. Like, we haven't even talked about all the instructions that are in the entire book of Leviticus. But Moses is told, speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. That's the instruction that he's given. And so what does Moses do? Moses goes up there and he says, listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock? And then he hits it a couple times with his staff. Here's what I think is going on. Moses is frustrated and angry at the people of Israel and feeling like, here's what I think is going on with Moses is he is falling a little bit for a temptation of leadership. And that temptation is to think that it's about me and that I'm in charge. And I need to make this happen. Because if you look at what he says and what he does, he chastises the people, and then he says, must we bring you water out of this rock? Not God. It's Moses. Must we bring you water out of this rock? And then he doesn't do what God told him to do. He does what Moses did last time that God did this through him. And so Moses did this once before. It's almost like, okay, I know how this works. We're going to bring you water, knock, knock. And then the water comes forth. But that's not the way that God told him to do it. And so I almost feel like God is chastising Moses because he's falling into a little bit of this temptation of leadership to think that it's about me, that I am in charge, that I am making this happen. And so that was kind of Moses' failure there. Now, what does seem a little bit harsh is that, this is one slip up, and now he doesn't get to go to the promised land. It feels harsh to us, but at the same time, we also come from the perspective of so much grace that has been poured out through Jesus, and that's kind of our background. This is a people that God has brought out and was kind of laying the law down and saying, literally, saying, this is what I need you to do if you are to be my people, and if you can't do that, then there are consequences. And so he was laying this out. And so in that sense, like, he needed to be strict, I guess. I also wanted to point out, in the book of James, it says in chapter 2, verse 10, it says, whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles at just one point is guilty of breaking all of it. And so we that's something we need to remember. And thankfully, like I said, like, we come from the experience of counting on Jesus' grace and Jesus' forgiveness to cover that. At the time of Moses, like, he didn't have that understanding, and that hadn't been really laid down. Not sure the wording I want to use there, but that hadn't been done yet. And so for us, if we stumble on one point of the law, we can ask for forgiveness, and that forgiveness can cover that, cover all of our sin. But it's just a reminder that, we are so dependent on Jesus' sacrifice and his forgiveness, because we screw up on one thing, well, that's it. Because, like it says, whoever keeps the whole law but stumbles on just one point is guilty of the whole law. And so that's just something to keep in mind. Going to move on to another story. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this one because I think Pastor Melissa preached on it not that long ago. But once again, the Israelites are, you guessed it, complaining. It says they traveled from Mount Hor along the road to the Red Sea to go around Edom. Oh, hold on, let me pull that map back up. So Edom is kind of down there in the south, and so they're kind of trying to skirt around that. But it says they tried to skirt around Edom, but the people grew impatient on the way. They spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? They sound like a broken record. There is no bread, there is no water, and we detest this miserable food. Then the Lord sent venomous snakes among them. They bit the people, and many Israelites died. The people came to Moses and said, "We sinned when we spoke against the Lord and against you. Pray that the Lord will take the snakes away from us." So Moses prayed for the people. The Lord said to Moses, "Make a snake and put it up on a pole. Anyone who is bitten can look at it and live." So Moses made a bronze snake and put it up on a pole. Then when anyone was bitten by a snake and they looked at the snake, they lived. So like I said, Pastor Melissa preached on this not too long ago. And she kind of made the point that, God gives us the means of being healed. That's a artist's rendering of the snake on the pole. So God gives us the means to be healed. But we need to avail ourselves of them. Okay? And so she made the example of, there's addiction helps, but you can't make somebody go and get that help. They need to go and get that help for themselves. They need to avail themselves of that help. If you have a headache, there is Tylenol, but it doesn't do you any good if you don't go to the medicine cabinet and you take the Tylenol. And so we have an article of faith in the Church of the Nazarene that talks about healing. It says, "We believe in the biblical doctrine of divine healing, and we urge our people to offer the prayer of faith for the healing of the sick." But it doesn't just stop there. It goes on to say, "We also believe God heals through the means of medical science." And so I think it's important for us to remember that we don't just pray for healing. We avail ourselves of all of the means that God has made available to us. And so when we have medical issues, I think about sometimes, like when we say, well, I'm not going to go to the doctor about this. And I do this too. So I'm stepping on my own toes, as Melissa says. I'm not going to go to the doctor about this. Are we refusing a grace of God when we do that? Because he's made this healing available through the means of medical science. And then if we refuse that, or are we refusing the grace of God? And so that was just a thought that I had. With regards to the snake that that Moses had lifted up. It was I had to kind of I was reading through all these stories again this week, and I had to kind of laugh when I got to this one. And I just feel like, first of all, everybody should be glad that I'm not God. But I'm reading through these and I'm thinking, if I was God, I would be so done with the people of Israel by this point. Like every time, it's like, oh, woe is us. You brought us out here to die. And so it feels like, to me, if it was me, I'd be like, oh, they're complaining again. Here, snakes. Have some snakes. And then when they came around, you know what? I'll put a snake up on a pole. That'll fix them. It just, if it was me, I would be frustrated by this point. And so that's kind of how I read it. I'm sure it's not. I'm thankful that God has a lot more patience than I do. But so that was that story. And then moving on from there, they started finally making their way back north towards the Promised Land after the time had started coming to pass where the generation had died away that refused to go in. And so they get to which one was it? I think it's the Moabites. They get to the land where they're about to enter into Moab, and they have already beaten one people on the way there. And so word has gotten to Moab about this. And the king of the Moabites says, I'm gonna bring in this diviner and have him pronounce a curse on the people of Israel, and that'll do it. That'll fix them. So he calls this guy named Balaam, or Balaam, whichever. He calls him in, and the Lord sends a messenger, or sends a message to Balaam to say, you're not supposed to do this. I don't want you to pronounce any curse on these people because they are blessed. I have blessed them. You are to pronounce no curses on these people. And so Balaam's like, okay, I won't do that. And so he tells the people of the king, I can't, and actually he words it in a way, basically, you can't pay me enough to do this because I've been told specifically not to do this. And so then the king sends back some more highly influential people to ask him again. And God sends a message to Balaam and says, okay, go, but you only say the words that I give you. And something kind of gets lost in the translation here somewhere, because on the way there, Balaam is riding this donkey, and the donkey starts, he stops. He will not go any further. And so Balaam starts kicking this donkey and beating it. Come on, let's get moving. And eventually the donkey's like, I don't know how God did it, but he made the donkey to speak. And he says, what are you kicking me for? Like, have I not been faithful to you all this time that you've had me as your animal? And basically, at that moment, God opens Balaam's eyes and see that there is an angel standing in his way, preventing him from going forward. And so it's just a reminder to Balaam that he is only to be doing what God tells him to do in this, because God does not want a curse on the people. He wants, they've already been blessed. And so Balaam goes forward. He goes to the king, and he winds up pronouncing a blessing because that's what God wants him to do. Balaam winds up pronouncing a blessing over the people of Israel instead of a curse, which the king is not fond of. But that's kind of how that story ends. Now, what some people love to say about this story is that if God can speak through a donkey, then he can certainly use us. So, but that's just another one of the stories along the way here. as they start making their way up north towards the promised land. Now, where they're going to be going, let me pull that map up. They're going kind of, okay, you see where Moabites are down in the southeast part of the map. They're going to be heading up the east side of the Dead Sea. And then that line between where it says Canaanites and Amorites, that's the Jordan River. And so they're going to be coming up the east side of that, and then they're going to cut across the Jordan River as they enter into the Promised Land. And so we're going to be right on the edge of that for next week, or next Sunday. So I think I've gotten you pretty much to the point where we're going to be talking next Sunday. So that's where we're at. I will see you on Sunday, maybe, depending on how we do Sunday morning service. We are not going to be in person, by the way. We are going virtual this Sunday. However, I'm not entirely sure at this point how that is going to look. Since Pastor Melissa was doing Facebook Live last week, I'm hoping we can get some things worked in this week, more normal-ish. But I will see you next Sunday or next Thursday, not Thursday, or next Tuesday night. So I will talk to you later.